2002. The world is still reeling from Y2K paranoia. 9/11 has just reshaped global fear, and horror is in a slump. Then, out of nowhere, a low-budget British film drops like a viral bomb. No big stars, just a camcorder, a haunting score, and rage. 28 Days Later wasn't survival horror. It was collapse horror. It asked not just how we'd survive the end of the world, but who we'd become when we did. Today we're going back to where it all began, to explore how 28 Days Later infected horror, and why the fever never really broke. In traditional zombie horror, death is slow. A bite, an infection, a gradual decline, a creeping dread. But 28 Days Later didn't wait. The disease hits like a freight train. Within seconds, the rage virus transforms humans into sprinting, snarling vessels of pure violence. While fast-moving zombies had appeared in earlier films like Dawn of the Dead, Nightmare City, and Return of the Living Dead, it's easy to forget just how revolutionary they felt in the early 2000s. By then, audiences were conditioned to the slow, shuffling corpses of George Romero's Undead, but 28 Days Later shattered that expectation. These weren't traditional zombies. As the film insists, they were infected, not reanimated.
Infected with what?
Driven by uncontrollable rage instead of decay. 28 Days Later didn't invent the quick zombie, but it crystallised the concept for modern horror by making speed and ferocity central to its identity. Suddenly, zombies had a new gear: urgency. The horror didn't just stalk you, it ran you down. It chased you in stairwells, it smashed through windows. It didn't give you time to process or plan. It demanded fight or flight. This wasn't just scarier, it was more human. The rage virus wasn't a monster in disguise. It was us, without a filter. Violent, instinctual, and horrifyingly quick to break. In that way, 28 Days Later didn't just evolve the zombie, it made the fear relatable. Because what if the scariest part of the apocalypse is how fast we'd all lose control? If 28 Days Later feels less like a movie and more like a waking nightmare, that's by design. Danny Boyle made the radical choice to shoot mostly on mini DV camcorders, a format known more for home videos than for cinematic horror. But what could have been a limitation became the film's secret weapon. The digital grain, the overexposed lights, the blown out blacks, the guerrilla shooting style. They stripped away the gloss of Hollywood horror and replaced it with something ugly. It felt like a documentary about the end of the world, and that decision did more than save time or money. It shaped how we experience the apocalypse. From the film's intense laboratory prologue to the city's deserted iconography, these sequences don't feel staged, they feel captured. The camera isn't a passive observer. It jerks, it blurs, it stares too long. That intimacy, that urgency, mirrors the film's theme, that the virus isn't some distant threat, it's already here, right behind you. In a time before the term elevated horror even existed, 28 Days Later proved that visual grit could be just as terrifying as gore. It made horror personal, and in doing so, it made it unforgettable. Following its opening sequence, 28 Days Later truly begins in near total silence. Just Jim, alone in a hollowed out London. This quiet dread is more unsettling than the brief glimpse of violence which preceded it. It's the absence of life, hope, and explanation. The horror here isn't just about survival. It's about being left behind, about waking up to a world that doesn't exist anymore and realising that no one is coming to explain it. What we're seeing feels overly intimate and yet completely unfamiliar, like we're intruding on someone's nightmare, and in doing so, it makes the eventual chaos hit harder. When the infected do finally appear, it's not just scary because of the violence, it's terrifying because of what we've lost in contrast, the stillness, the possibility of hope, the illusion that things might not be as bad as they seem. And 28 days later, the world doesn't end with a bang. It ends with an empty street. "28 Days Later's apocalypse is distinctly British, not just in geography, but in tone, culture, and class. It was refreshing to see the end of the world unfold, not in New York or Los Angeles, but in London, and not the postcard-ready version of the capital either, but the place most Brits actually knew. Grey skies, shuttered shops, and dirty streets. There's a damp, drizzly mundanity to it all. London doesn't look cinematic, it looks post-commute. There's something uniquely unnerving about watching buses tipped over on Westminster Bridge or seeing Piccadilly Circus completely deserted. What truly sets 28 Days Later apart is its focus on the ordinary. Corner shops, housing estates, supermarkets, churches. London isn't glamorous, it's painfully recognisable. Whether you're a British viewer who knows the surroundings or an international audience absorbing the cultural texture, the realism lands like a gut punch. In contrast to the high-octane action often seen in American zombie films, 28 Days Later stays grounded. It leans into British stoicism, with characters who bury emotion to survive. Jim doesn't scream when he finds his parents dead. Selena doesn't cry when Mark dies. The horror is absorbed, internalised, and all the more effective because of it. The film also offers a pointed critique of class and power. Jim, a bicycle courier, and Selena, a tough, no-nonsense survivor, clash with the militarised worldview of the soldiers they encounter, exposing how collapse threatens to re-entrench oppressive systems, particularly patriarchal control over women. The rage virus originates from a misguided act in a lab, a metaphor for British hubris and inward collapse, not global dominance. This is a British apocalypse in bleak, understated, and uncannily polite form, a reflection of identity as much as extinction. If 28 Days Later asks what happens to society after it collapses, its answer isn't subtle. It's wearing camouflage and holding a rifle. By the final act, we've seen rage-infected bodies tear through civilians, but the real horror isn't outside the gates, it's inside the so-called safe military outpost. This narrative turn wasn't entirely new. Night of the Living Dead ended with the haunting irony of a black protagonist surviving the undead only to be gunned down by armed men, and Day of the Dead portrayed a crumbling society in which the military becomes volatile, abusive, and paranoid. Both films suggested that humans could be as dangerous, if not more so, than the monsters themselves. But 28 Days Later took this idea, which had previously lurked in the subtext or as a final twist, and made it the driving force of its final act. From the moment the survivors discover the radio transmission and head towards Manchester in search of sanctuary, the film begins carefully laying the groundwork. The soldiers, led by Christopher Eccleston's chilling Major West, aren't trying to restore civilization, they're trying to reshape it into something coercive and cruel. Suddenly, the infected don't seem like the worst case scenario anymore. What made this shift so radical and so influential was its redefinition of monstrosity. Zombie films had always been about survival, but 28 Days Later added a bitter twist. Survival might demand becoming something monstrous yourself. Rage isn't just a virus, it's a human impulse exposed when the thin veil of civility is stripped away. This idea rippled through the genre. Others would follow, expanding on the ideas that 28 Days Later brought to the surface. From body horror to something existential. It didn't just ask how we survive, it asked, who do we become when no one's watching? In a post-28 Days Later world, the slow shambling horde no longer felt like a threat. Horror had evolved, and with it, our expectations. Audiences, living in an era of rolling crises and real-time panic, demanded more than moaning corpses. They wanted urgency. They needed chaos that could match their own. The shift from shuffling to sprinting didn't just raise the stakes, it reset them. The infected became avatars of modern anxiety, fast, feral, and unstoppable. Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead remake replaced Romero's mournful march with a relentless charge. World War Z turned viral outbreaks into sheer kinetic terror, with infected swarms crashing through cities like tsunamis of fear. Train to Busan combined blistering momentum with raw human emotion, proving this new Undead model had global reach and emotional depth. Even prestige television followed suit. The Walking Dead borrowed 28 Days Later's coma opening and moral bleakness, while The Last of Us fused pandemic paranoia with mutated monsters for a new generation. In 2007, 28 Weeks Later emerged not as a direct sequel, but as a chilling expansion. The scale widened, the violence escalated, and the horror shifted into something colder and more militarised. Despite a solid reception, a third entry never came. And yet, the wait became part of the legacy. For over 15 years, the absence transformed into myth, a symbol of the first film's lasting grit. Fans weren't just waiting for more infected carnage, they were waiting because this story, this world, still mattered. The rage hadn't burned out, it had been simmering. Then in 2024, the moment finally came. Boyle and Garland announced 28 years later, the first in a new trilogy, reuniting the original creative team. The news didn't just make headlines, it reignited something. Not just nostalgia, but anticipation. Because this wasn't just a return, it was a reminder. 28 Days Later didn't fade, it endured. What I want to know is, what do you think about 28 Days Later's lasting impact? Is it the condition or the metaphor that defines a zombie? Are you excited for 28 years later? Drop your thoughts in the comments. But until next time, don't trust the silence. It's rarely empty.